SOC 243A Criminology. I'm Professor Moran, and this lecture is entitled Moffitt's Adolescence Limited and Life Course Persistent Offenders, Part 1. This lecture is based on a 1993 article by Terry Moffitt, Adolescence Limited and Life Course Persistent Antisocial Behavior, a Developmental Taxonomy. I call this article The Beast. Okay, it's only 28 pages, and trust me, there are much longer articles out there. Nonetheless, the print is tiny and each page has a double column. To add, the ideas, although very clear once you understand them, are so densely packed into this 28 pages, there's no filler here. Every word counts. Having said that, in my opinion, this is one of the top three best pieces in criminology ever written. If you were to read only one article on criminology and one article alone, it would be this one. One of the most consistent findings in criminology, one which has been found from the earliest statistics on crime, and to this day, is that there is a relationship between age and crime. When graphed out, the relationship between age and crime looks like what you see here. You'll notice a sharp increase in crime around ages 13, 14, a peak in criminality at ages 17 or 18, followed by a sharp decline in the decade of the 20s, which then continues into the 30s and 40s. Let's take a look at how this graph might be constructed. Crime is difficult to count by observation. It is more common for criminologists to examine state records or police files for data on crime levels. So let's say you count all the arrests on file for 2016 for some area, and let's say you get about 10,583 arrests. We're going to call this 10,000 arrests to make it simple. If you sort these arrests by age, that is, you count how many arrests, let's say 14-year-olds were arrested, 16-year-olds were arrested, and 18-year-olds were arrested, and so on. And if you plot those arrest figures by age, you'll start getting a curve shape like you see here. This shape is so consistently found, meaning that you could pick any year, let's say 1972, and if accurate data is available, you'll get the same curve. This curve is so consistent that it has its own special name, the age crime curve. A simple but important question can be posed at this point. Is the dramatic increases in arrests among teenagers or during the teenage years due to there being more people willing to offend, or do those who already offend simply offend more during these years? It turns out criminologists know the answer. This excerpt is taken from Moffitt 1993. Empirical evaluations now suggest that the former explanation is correct. In his English study of offense rates over age, Farrington showed that the adolescent peak reflects a temporary increase in the number of people involved in antisocial behavior, not a temporary acceleration of the offense rates of individuals. This finding has been replicated in American samples. Wolfgang, Thornberry, and Figlio, 1987. So it appears that the spike in crime during the adolescent years, 13 to 19, is due to large increases in the number of adolescents willing to offend. So far, so good. But here's a problem. The age crime curve is based on arrest statistics. This means the left-hand side of the curve is blanked out. Not because there's nothing going on during this time, but because problem behavior occurring before age 10 doesn't tend to result in arrest. If the behavior does not result in an arrest, it will not appear on this graph. Let's take a moment to examine a different concept, not crime, as measured in arrests, but antisocial behavior. Now let's note that like any social construct, antisocial behavior is behavior that is defined as antisocial. Examples of antisocial behavior are perhaps better at explaining what this concept is than definitions. Examples include lying, throwing a temper tantrum, screaming, stealing, fighting with other children, refusing to obey, being a nuisance in public, skipping school, hassling teachers, stealing from a store, verbal harassment, robbing someone, cheating on your partner, forging documents, beating somebody up, embezzling, rape, murder, and so on, are all considered antisocial behavior. From the examples above, you'll note that some antisocial behavior is technically legal, whereas some is illegal, that is criminal. Antisocial behavior is a spectrum, and that spectrum includes, but is not limited to, behavior we define as crime. Note, importantly, much antisocial behavior will not lead to an arrest, thus will be absent from data based on arrest statistics. So, an important question to ask at this point is, what happens when we look at antisocial behavior and not simply arrest? Does this change the age crime curve? This graph is antisocial behavior plotted by age. What do we notice? Well, most importantly, we now see that antisocial behavior is found at ages 10, but all the way back to ages of about 3 or 4. This fills in the blank spot in the age crime curve based on arrests. So, when we look at antisocial behavior, a much broader category than arrestable behavior, we note very, very importantly that some people exhibit antisocial behavior long before first arrest. This behavior is invisible if you only look at arrest statistics. Most people in this graph, however, do not exhibit much or severe antisocial behavior prior to first arrest. They begin offending during adolescence, but then cease once they enter into their 20s. Those that exhibit antisocial behavior long before first arrest not only continue antisocial behavior, now serious enough to be criminal during adolescence, but they are much more likely to continue once their teenage years are over. That is, to continue into their 20s and maybe even 30s and 40s, which at this point will now be considered adult criminality. So it seems, the age crime curve conceals and contains two groups. Groups who look similar according to arrest statistics during adolescence, but whose behavior, that is offending, has a distinctly different pattern and hence different causes. These two groups, adolescence-limited offenders, are characterized by that their antisocial behavior begins and ends in adolescence. And the second group, life course persistent offenders, whose antisocial behavior is continuous across the life course, that is, their lives. Hence, the name or title of this article, Adolescence Limited and Life Course Persistent Antisocial Behavior. Now, returning to the graph we ended our introductory lecture with, you should recognize this. Remember the 5 or 6 offenders who accounted for over 50% of the crime? Now we have a name for them. Life course persistent offenders.